welcome to my channel. My name is Willow Rose Moon Dancer and I make videos here on YouTube about Wicca, and I also have a blog called WiccensAren'tWicked.com. Today we are going to start a two-part video about covens. Today we're going to talk about what covens are, how you may join one, and the pros and cons of being in a coven. And in the second part of this video, which will probably be not next week, but the following week, will be more about how you go up in degree as you study in a coven, as well as more specifics on what a high priest and priestess can do. So, first off, we need to talk about what a coven actually is. So a coven is essentially either a group of Wiccans or a group of witches. If it's a group of Wiccans, they typically gather for every Sabbath and 1 to 2 times a month for Esbats, as some people celebrate just the full moon or just the new moon, and some celebrate both. And they'd also gather for various rituals like dedications and stuff like that, as well as for doing magic together. If you are simply a witch, though, with no Wiccan background, then you gather most likely for full moons, as that is when magical energy is most powerful, and then also just for any other magical workings. For the sake of this video, however, I'm going to only focus on Wiccan covens. And the first thing we need to talk about Wiccan covens is that, just like in Christianity, there are different types of churches, and in Wicca there are different types of covens. So, for example, in the church you have your Baptist, you have United, you have Catholic, you have Anglican, you have all these different denominations of churches, and the same thing happens in covens. Every coven has various traditions that they follow. So you might have a gardener tradition, you might have a Dianic one, you might have a coven solely for hereditary Wiccans, you might have a Draconic coven. Anything, whatever tradition you can think of, there's probably a coven for it. However, it is good to note that covens for eclectic, to my knowledge, is not as common, because it's kind of harder to make everyone happy when everybody believes in possibly completely different things. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But when you are looking for a coven, it's very important to look for one that follows your belief system. You don't just want to go to any coven just because that's what's around. So say you live in, I don't know, San Francisco is the first place that came to mind, and you can only find a coven for Dianic Wiccans. However, you don't hold Dianic views, it doesn't make sense for you to join that coven simply because it is a coven. You need to find a coven that you can fully enjoy and fully participate in. So that's that. Now, the second part to this is how you join a coven. Honestly, it depends on the coven, and also usually depends on the tradition. So when you're looking at your more traditional traditions, the traditions that very much try and replicate the old pagan ways, you're gonna have to be invited to that. So, and if you don't get invited, you just can't join. That's just how it is. However, other covens, especially ones that follow newer traditions that kind of just take ideas from older paganism and have fostered it into this new neo-pagan idea, there is a possibility that you can just simply ask to join that coven. It really just depends. And within a coven, it's also important to remember that each coven usually has 1 to 2 leaders, which are the high priest or the high priestess. You can have just one of those, or you can have both of those. And most covens have approximately 3 to 20 members. Once again, it depends on the place you live in, how big it is, and just the population of Wiccans that you have in that area. So now we are going to move on to the pros and cons of having a coven and not having a coven. So for the pros, it really encourages a sense of having support and companionship. I know as a solitary Wiccan, it can be very lonely and isolating not having anyone around that you can relate to about your beliefs. So yeah, that's definitely a pro to being in a coven. Also in a coven, you're going to have people who are going to teach you the craft. It's very common for every new person in a coven to have a mentor, and that mentor, which we'll talk more about in the next video about covens, will help you approach your study into becoming a more involved member of the coven. But when you're solitary like yourself, you kind of just have to learn for yourself, which is kind of one of the main reasons why I do the videos that I do, because I know that it's very hard for solitary Wiccans to find good information, and I'm just trying to help provide more sources for that. Another pro is that you get to study to get into higher degrees and higher status within the coven, and eventually you could even become a high priest or priestess, which is pretty cool if you ask me. And one more pro is that you have a set schedule and plan for how you're going to learn. A lot of people really enjoy routine and structure, and being within a coven is really going to give you that. Now, when it comes to the cons, in a coven, it's possible that the leaders, your high priest or priestess, or whoever's organizing your coven, could decide on meeting times and attendance rules and whatnot that clashes with your schedule. So being adults, it's very hard to find a time in a week where everyone is available to do something. And if you're in the minority on being available or not being available, it's quite possible that you're going to have to miss out on time with your coven because of other obligations that you have in your life. And then another con is the expectations of the members in the coven that you may not be comfortable with. And so just one example of this is dress code. So it's quite possible that the coven that you're in requires like a special type of robe or a special colors that you have to wear, and it's quite possible that your coven is going to require you to be sky clad, and if that's not something you are comfortable with, it's definitely not the coven for you, and you should not be in it. But that is something to think about, is just the expectations the coven's going to have for you. And this kind of ties in with those expectations, which is con number 3. You could be held accountable for keeping laws of the tradition, and by could, I mean you will be. So if these laws are broken, you can be kicked out of the coven, depending on how many and how severe this law is that you break. Just like with any group or organization, there are rules to be followed, right? And yeah, so that's also something to keep in mind. You don't have as much free will as you are when you're solitary. Another con is that if you leave the coven you're in to go change to another coven, because people adapt, their beliefs change, things don't work out, it's quite possible that no matter how high up you were in your degree system, in your coven, that you're going to have to start your study way back at zero. And that can be really frustrating for people who have been working years and years and years to gain various statuses within their coven and having it be completely erased away in the eyes of a new coven that you go to. And another con would be that you may not like all of the people in your coven, and that could sound a little petty, if you will, but just think about how much your day is affected by the people who you associate yourself with. If there's someone that you really don't like at your workplace and you can't do anything about it, it can really ruin your experiences at work. And if there's someone at your coven that you really just do not mesh with, it could really damper your engagement within the coven and just your overall experience within the coven and within your own religion, potentially. And the last con that I have for you is your beliefs may not totally match up everything that your high priest or priestess is teaching, which can cause some discomfort for you. So I know back when I was going to church, when I was a Christian, I went to various different churches, just whichever church my parents went to. There was United, we went to the People's Church, we went to Baptist churches, and I think no matter what church you go to or whatever coven you go to, you're never gonna completely agree with everything that your church or coven or your synagogue or whatever is going to stand for. And especially if it's something a little bit more important and the person who is teaching your group is really values this one thing that you don't agree with, it can really make your experience not as fulfilling. So an example of this is when I was getting taught Reiki, the woman who was teaching me kept talking about angels and Jesus even and stuff like that. And as someone who just definitely doesn't believe in the Jesus, Son of God, sure, I believe he was a man and a healer, but not in the sense that she was talking about him, and someone who's very agnostic about angels, I found that it kind of took away from my experience because I had to keep sitting there wondering if maybe this wasn't the class I should be attending, or trying to figure out what figures I could be substituting in my head instead of angels and Jesus for it to make sense with me. And it was uncomfortable, and she could even tell that I was uncomfortable, and probably a few others, because she even had to make a disclaimer while she was teaching us and being like, it's okay if not all of you believe these things, these are just examples that I'm giving you from my personal life, right? But even just those small things can take an experience that was going really great into an experience that is just okay, or even worse, not good at all. However, that is all I have for today's video. Make sure you are looking for the part 2 of this coven conversation we are having. Make sure you check out my blog, wiccansartwicked.com. I make posts every Wednesday and Friday, and make sure you subscribe to me here because I make videos every Monday and Thursday. And until next time, blessed be.